The morning sun burned hot over the restless waters off the coast of Gansbai, South Africa, a place known for its haunting beauty and apex predators. Beneath the rolling waves, Chloe Roberts, a 33-year-old experienced diver from Cape Town, moved with practiced ease. Diving had been her passion for over a decade. She was calm in the deep, always searching, always observing. Slim, athletic, with sharp green eyes that had seen the ocean's darkest secrets, Chloe was in her element. This dive had started like any other. The currents were steady, the water was cool against her wetsuit, and the visibility stretched clear and sharp in every direction. Around her, schools of fish shimmered like liquid metal, weaving between the jagged spires of rock rising from the ocean floor. She adjusted her buoyancy, drifting lower, mesmerized by the life teeming around her. Her breathing was slow and even. Every detail of the underwater world seemed magnified. But beneath that beauty, the deep always held shadows. Chloe didn't see the shark at first. A 20-foot great white patrolled its kingdom beyond the reef's edge. Massive, ancient, and powerful, the predator moved silently through the water. It was not hunting, not yet. Its black eyes scanned the deep automatically, a creature driven by instinct and raw power. Chloe swam further from her group, following a curious formation of rocks and kelp. Her heartbeat was steady, focused only on the world before her. But as she drifted through a narrow gap between two outcrops, she didn't realize how quickly the world behind her changed. The shark was closing in. It hadn't seen her at first either. But now, as Chloe rounded the rocky bend, she swam straight into its path. 20 feet of muscle and scarred white belly loomed before her like a living wall. For a fraction of a second, both human and predator were caught in mutual shock, neither expecting the other. The shark reacted first. It lunged with a quick move, driven not by hunger but surprise. Its snout struck Chloe square in the chest, a brutal head-on collision that sent her tumbling backward through the water. The world was flipped upside down. The impact knocked the regulator partially from her mouth. The taste of salt water burned her throat. Her vision blurred. The force left her dizzy, her limbs briefly paralyzed by the animal's raw power. As her vision cleared, horror swallowed her. The shark was turning. Its enormous body twisted with impossible grace for something so large. Its mouth opened wide, rows of jagged teeth spreading into a cavern of death. The dark pits of its eyes locked onto her. The jaws came fast, too fast, aiming straight for her head. She kicked with every ounce of strength she had. Her fins lashed out wildly, driving her sideways as the mouth closed. The razor teeth missed her skull by inches but found skin instead. An explosion of pain tore across her face and shoulder as the teeth grazed her, peeling back flesh like wet paper. Blood clouded the water. Adrenaline surged through Chloe's body like fire. She twisted again, forcing herself away from the monster. The shark's momentum carried it past her, but only just. It banked sharply, its tail cutting a violent arc through the blue. Chloe's mind screamed at her to move. The surface felt impossibly far away. Every second felt stretched and distorted. She kicked hard, ignoring the searing pain in her shoulder. Her wetsuit was torn. Blood poured from the long gashes across her face and arm, trailing behind her like a beacon in the water. The shark circled. It had tasted blood now. Its instincts were fully awake. The injury was minor to the large animal, but the scent triggered something primal. Chloe pushed herself harder than she ever had. Her limbs felt heavy. The pressure of the deep clutched at her like hands trying to drag her down. But survival overrode fear. She angled upward, kicking for the thin shimmer of light high above. The shark moved again. It was closing the distance, faster this time, more deliberate. Each movement of its tail sent it rocketing closer to her vulnerable form. Chloe could feel it in her bones, the death that chased her. She refused to look back. Looking back would slow her down. Above, shadows moved. Two other divers, part of her group, and had seen the blood rising like smoke through the water. They were already swimming hard toward her, desperate, terrified. One of them, Nick, a veteran diver who was built like a swimmer, reached her first. He grabbed the strap of her gear and yanked her upward with brutal force. Below them, the shark came on. Nick kicked furiously, dragging Chloe along with him. Another diver, Maria, reached them too, thrusting the butt of a GoPro stick toward the shark. A useless barrier against such a creature, but a desperate gesture nonetheless. The shark closed in. It passed so close beneath Chloe that she could see the scars on its snout, the rough patches of its pale underbelly, the endless rows of teeth ready to clamp shut. But it hesitated, just for a second, confused by the movement, the strange shapes above. That second saved her life. The divers broke the surface in a violent rush. Shouts filled the air. Arms reached for Chloe, dragging her onto the waiting boat. Blood poured from her wounds, mixing with seawater that streamed from her gear and hair. The ache in her shoulder was blinding. Her face throbbed with raw open wounds, but she was alive. The shark sank back into the deep, disappearing as silently as it had arrived. On the deck, Chloe sat shaking, teeth clenched against the pain. Her wetsuit was shredded across one shoulder. Her face bore the raw signature of the great white's near-fatal curiosity, a brutal reminder of the thin line between life and death in the ocean. In the days that followed, as stitches pulled her skin back together and the bruises darkened beneath her eyes, Chloe Roberts changed. She had stared death in the face and survived. But more than that, she understood the creature that had almost killed her. Not a monster, but a predator following instinct. In time, her scars became symbols of survival. She would go on to tell her story not as a tale of terror, but as a lesson, a call for safer diving, respect of the wild, and protection of the creatures that ruled the deep long before humans ever entered it. In 2016, Elena Rodriguez, a 38-year-old marketing consultant from San Diego, had traveled to Guadalupe Island, off the wild, rugged coast of Baja California, Mexico, chasing a dream she had held for years, to swim freely with great white sharks in their natural habitat, untethered, unprotected, face to face with one of the ocean's most feared predators, believing in her heart that raw courage could somehow overcome the cold, indifferent power of nature. However, she was little more than a novice in the world of diving, with only a handful of dives in calm, shallow waters behind her, and none that came even close to the danger she was now willingly embracing. The sun had risen high over the rolling Pacific that morning, its sharp glare reflecting in broken waves around the dive boat as the crew prepared the group for their descent. The professional guides were stern-faced and clear in their warnings, explaining once again how Guadalupe Island was unlike any other place in the world, a deep-water hunting ground for the largest great whites on the planet, their movements swift, their ambushes silent, their power beyond anything most divers could imagine. While the cages provided safety, protection, and a boundary between human fragility and the ocean's most perfected predator, Elena wanted none. Driven by stubbornness, pride, and a desperate thirst for an encounter so raw it would burn in her memory forever, she had insisted on diving without the cage, brushing off the guide's caution with a nervous laugh, certain that staying calm and respecting the animal would be enough, even as the currents beneath the boat stirred stronger than expected, pulling and shifting with unseen force, a reminder that she was a visitor in a world she could neither control nor fully understand. The group entered the water in cautious pairs, their bright wetsuits and oxygen tanks glinting like tiny sparks in the endless blue. They drifted near the boat where the cages hung like steel shadows, their bars thick and unforgiving. The deeper water beyond stretched into an empty, beckoning darkness, beautiful and terrible all at once. Elena, separate from the others by choice, swam ahead with long, eager strokes, the water enveloping her completely. The only sounds her steady breathing and the faint crackle of distant bubbles as she pushed further, her movements quick and uneven, small bursts of energy that scattered fish and sent curious glances from other divers, but far below and beyond them, it caught the attention of something else, something far older and infinitely more dangerous. A great white shark, nearly 18 feet long, its bulk graceful and deadly, its body scarred from years of survival, had been circling the edges of the activity, calm, measured, uninterested in the dull clang of cages or the distant scent of chum, until that unmistakable flicker of weakness, frantic movement isolated from the group, vulnerable, pulled it from the shadows, driving it upward. It zeroed in on Elena as she hovered in the open water, still oblivious to the doom racing toward her from the depths below. The first strike happened so fast that many of the divers' onlookers were left frozen in shock, their hearts slamming in their chests as they stared through their masks at the violent blur of motion erupting beneath Elena, a flash of gray and white exploding upward like a torpedo, its enormous jaws opening in an arc so wide it seemed impossible, rows of serrated teeth catching the light for a fraction of a second before slamming shut against her right leg, crushing flesh and bone with astonishing force as Elena's body twisted violently, a cloud of dark blood bursting outward like ink, staining the clear blue in horrifying contrast. Dragged downward in an instant, she thrashed in pure panic, bubbles pouring from her mouth in frantic bursts as she fought against the crushing pull of the animal, now driving her beneath the surface. Her arms flailing helplessly, the pain from her shredded limb collapsing into numb terror as the pressure increased. Her body hauled deeper, faster, wrapped in the brutal grip of the predator whose black eyes reflected nothing but ancient hunger and primal dominance. The group above was no longer moving. They could only watch in horror as Elena disappeared beneath the surface, a trail of blood rising steadily in her wake, broken pieces of her fin drifting upward like ghostly debris. At the same time, the shark adjusted its grip, shaking her violently once, twice, the raw power of its movement rippling through the water, as though she were no more than a rag doll in its jaws, before releasing her suddenly, letting her body float limply for a moment, drifting downward in a slow, almost peaceful spiral. But the peace was deceptive and short-lived, for the shark returned almost immediately, surging in again, this time clamping down across her torso in a brutal bite that sent another cloud of red spinning outward, the soundless violence of the moment playing out like a nightmare beneath the waves, her body buckling under the crushing force as the predator shook her side to side with horrifying strength, bones snapping beneath the pressure, wetsuit torn and shredded like paper, until finally the shark released her for good, turning away with a final flick of its enormous tail, disappearing into the dark void from which it had come, leaving behind only silence, blood, and stillness. Elena's body floated upward slowly, her limbs loose, her mask cracked, her life already long gone. When the guides finally reached her, gently pulling her broken form back toward the surface, nothing was left to be done but to bring her home and retrieve what the ocean had not claimed completely. At the same time, overhead, the crew scrambled to end the dive. Waves now splashed red. The dream of swimming freely with the great whites shattered forever. In the hours that followed, the shock and grief hung heavy over the boat, as the realization of what had happened settled like a weight on every heart aboard. The surviving divers sitting in stunned silence, haunted by the image of Elena's final moments, of her struggle against the raw, unstoppable force of nature. And though rescue teams arrived and recovered what remained of her body, the legacy of her death stretched far beyond that day, sparking an immediate ban on unprotected dives in the waters of Guadalupe, forcing tour companies to confront the dangers they had perhaps allowed themselves to forget, and pushing new, stricter safety measures into place to ensure that never again would a diver face the sea's oldest predator alone, unguarded, and unprepared. The afternoon sun burned high above the turquoise waters of the Indian Ocean, its heat harsh and unforgiving, as Leo Koivisto, a 34-year-old Finnish software developer on vacation, clung desperately to a piece of shattered debris from the catamaran that only hours earlier had carried him and 7 other tourists on what was meant to be a peaceful day of sailing near the Seychelles. The boat, sleek and white against the endless sea, had been no match for the squall that struck out of the blue, battering the vessel with towering waves until its hull cracked apart, pitching its passengers violently into open water, leaving them scattered and helpless against the vast, restless ocean, stretching out endlessly around them. Leo had always been drawn to travel to remote places far from the rigid predictability of his quiet life back home in Helsinki. But floating alone beneath the empty sky, the distant cries of his fellow passengers barely reaching him over the rhythmic slap of waves, he felt a different kind of isolation settle in, colder, heavier, more primal. The kind born not from solitude, but from the immediate, suffocating presence of danger. That danger revealed itself moments later, when the faint outline of an oceanic white-tip shark emerged from the deep blue beneath him, its broad pectoral fins stretched wide like wings, its slow, circling movement unnaturally calm. A creature evolved over millions of years to patrol these forgotten stretches of water, merciless and patient. Oceanic whitetips were notorious in these parts. Scavengers, opportunists, predators of shipwreck survivors, and those unlucky enough to be caught adrift far from shore. And even as Leo's heartbeat surged, the others huddled together in a tight group some distance away, their frantic splashes and shouted warnings lost in the space between them. At the same time, Leo's separation had become a silent invitation. The shark circle tightened gradually, each pass drawing nearer, its pale belly flashing faintly beneath the surface, its dark eyes fixed with unsettling focus on Leo's kicking legs and bleeding scrapes from where the catamaran's wreckage had cut him during the chaos. There was no doubt in Leo's mind what was about to happen, but the first explosive strike still came faster than thought, the shark's jaws opening wide, its teeth like jagged rows of white glass locking around Leo's left thigh in a brutal, twisting grip. The force of the bite tore him from the surface in an instant, yanking him downward in a violent rush of bubbles and blood. The pressure in his ears building sharply as the water closed overhead, the world narrowing to a haze of red and the crushing agony radiating from his leg where flesh and muscle tore under the shark's relentless pull. Leo thrashed with every ounce of strength he could summon, his free leg kicking wildly, hands clawing at the rough skin of the shark's head. The sensation of its sandpaper hide burning across his palms as he fought not only for freedom but for the primal need to breathe. Above him the surface shimmered like a distant, unreachable sky. Still, some desperate surge of adrenaline drove him to fight harder, lashing out with his fists, jabbing at the sensitive area near the predator's gills and eyes, every blow fueled by the raw terror flooding his veins, until the shark released him with sudden, chilling ease, its body twisting away into the bloody murk it had created. Leo kicked upward frantically, lungs screaming, his vision narrowing as the sunlight fractured above him, pulling himself toward life with nothing left but instinct. Breaking the surface felt like shattering glass, his first ragged gasp of air a mixture of salt water and blood. The pain in his leg unbearable, his body weak and trembling as he realized he was drifting further from the safety of the group. Their horrified faces turned toward him, arms waving frantically toward a distant boat approaching fast. Drawn by the growing commotion and the unmistakable slick of blood spreading across the surface in cruel, widening streaks. The shark had not gone far. Its dark shadow reappeared beneath him. Its movements more direct now, driven not just by curiosity but by the taste of blood and the thrill of the hunt. Leo's battered body barely responded as he splashed weakly, trying to appear larger, trying to fight the growing weight of exhaustion that dragged at his limbs. At the same time, the boat's engine roared closer, slicing across the water toward him with desperate speed. The crew acted without hesitation. A rescue line sliced through the air, landing dangerously close, and Leo forced his shaking arms to seize it. His numbed fingers barely managed to grip the coarse rope as strong hands hauled him toward salvation. The shark made one final pass beneath him, its looming form a haunting silhouette against the fractured light. But the aggravating noise, the thrash of propellers, and the flurry of movement drove it back into the depths, vanishing as quickly as it had come. Leo's body, slick with blood and seawater, was dragged aboard, his injured leg a grotesque mess of shredded flesh and torn muscle. The crew working feverishly to stem the bleeding, their hands pressing into the wounds. At the same time, voices shouted instructions and calls for medical assistance crackled over radios. Every breath burned, every second stretched impossibly long, but Leo was alive, his heart hammering against his ribs as the realization of what had happened settled heavily over him. Later, long after the chaos had passed, after he had been stabilized and his wounds stitched and dressed in the sterile calm of a hospital, Leo would stare out over the vast, endless sea, feeling the phantom ache of teeth in his flesh, haunted not only by the memory of the shark's eyes or the searing pain of its bite, but by the brutal knowledge of how fragile life could become in the space of a single heartbeat. And though he had survived, he knew its shadow would never leave him. The afternoon sun hung lazily over the calm waters of the Bahamas, casting shimmering patterns on the surface where 34-year-old Lena Hoffman moved slowly, enjoying the cool relief from the tropical heat. Originally from Hamburg, Germany, Lena had built her life around the ocean, working as a dive instructor on the islands for several years. She was known for her calm confidence in the water, deep respect for marine life, and belief that sharks, misunderstood and often demonized, posed little threat if approached with care and knowledge. But that afternoon, wading waist-deep near a busy marina on New Providence Island, Lena's ease would turn fatally fragile. The marina, though picturesque, was no stranger to sharks. Fishing boats came and went daily, many casually dumping scraps into the sea, conditioning local predators to associate the shallows with easy food. Lena knew this. She'd warned students about it often enough. But the afternoon was quiet, the water clear, the sky a brilliant blue without a trace of menace. She hadn't brought fins or gear, just slipped into the water for a relaxing swim after a long morning with clients. The decision seemed harmless. The risk seemed distant. But a large bull shark was already circling beneath that glassy surface, moving with slow, deliberate passes just beyond the shifting light. It was an impressive female, nearly 8 feet long, driven into the shallows by the smell of fish remains drifting from the marina. Bull sharks were notorious for their aggression, boldness, and hunting in murky water where other sharks hesitated. They were unpredictable, built like submerged battering rams with thick bodies, blunt snouts, and teeth designed to shear through bone and flesh. In this shark's world, scraps from the docks meant food, and Lena's slow-moving silhouette, upright, bare-legged, splashing gently, triggered a primal response. One moment Lena felt nothing more than the subtle push and pull of the tide against her body, and the next she felt a crushing, sickening pressure clamp down around her lower leg, as if a vice of steel had closed over her flesh and bone. The bull shark struck from below and slightly behind, its jaws locking onto her right calf with ease, its weight and force jerking her sideways with a violent pull that sent a plume of blood swirling instantly into the clear shallows. Pain, unlike anything Lena had ever known, exploded up her leg and into her spine. Still, instinct overtook thought, driving her to twist and fight, her hands thrashing against the water, her body lurching toward the shore with desperate energy. The shark's grip tightened with every movement, its serrated teeth sawing deeper as Lena kicked frantically with her free leg, sending splashes high into the air as screams tore from her throat, raw and panicked. The shark thrashed its head once, trying to drag her further out, the sand beneath her feet giving way as her body was pulled toward deeper water, her world narrowing to the unbearable pressure on her leg and the chaos of water frothing with blood and terror. On the shore, the scene was instant pandemonium. Beachgoers bolted to the water's edge, some frozen in horror, others rushing forward, shouting for help. A nearby fishing boat, moored only yards away, sprang into action. The crew members, hardened by years at sea, grabbed long wooden poles, gaffs, and anything they could reach, leaping aboard their vessel and pushing off from the dock in seconds. They knew the risks of these waters better than anyone, and immediately understood what was happening. Lena's vision blurred with pain, her strength fading, the shark's pull relentless as it began to shake its horrifying head side to side, trying to tear loose a piece of her leg. The shock of it all left her barely conscious of the world above the surface. The shouts, the running feet, the boat now powering toward her. But her hands kept moving, grabbing at anything, clawing toward the sand even as the water churned red around her waist. The boat reached her in seconds that felt like an eternity. Long poles stabbed into the water near the shark's head, prodding, jabbing, striking with brutal force to break its grip. The bull shark resisted at first, holding Lena's leg in its terrible jaws. However, repeated blows to its snout and gills finally forced it to release, its dark body twisting away in a flash of muscle before disappearing into the deeper water beyond. The crew hauled Lena from the bloodied sea with rough urgency, her body trembling uncontrollably, her leg a ruined mess of torn skin, exposed muscle, and deep, ragged wounds that poured blood onto the boat's deck as they raced for shore. Lena drifted in and out of consciousness, her pale face slick with seawater and sweat, her hands shaking from the adrenaline and shock flooding her system. Emergency crews were waiting by the time the boat reached the marina, locals already spreading word of the rare but horrific attack. Medics worked quickly, clamping arteries, applying pressure, and fighting to keep her stable as they rushed her to the nearest hospital. Hours later, after emergency surgery that lasted deep into the night, Lena's leg remained intact. A miracle, the doctors would later say, given the severity of her injuries and the power of the shark that had nearly taken her. Recovery would be long and brutal, a test not only of her body but of her mind, as the flashbacks and terror of those moments haunted her with quiet, unforgiving clarity. In the days that followed, the attack became the talk of the island, not just because it had happened so close to shore, but because it had occurred to Lena, the experienced dive instructor who had always seemed so in control of the sea. The locals, while shaken, were not surprised. They had warned often enough that the waters near the marina were not a place for casual swims, especially when the scent of fish waste clung to the tides. But for Lena, the lesson had been learned in blood, etched into memory by pain, fear, and the haunting realization that some mistakes come with a price no amount of caution can undo. Every scar told a story, and hers whispered a warning she would never forget. Anastasia Vetrov had always loved the ocean. At 26 years old, she carried herself with calm confidence from years of swimming in lakes, rivers, and seas back home in Russia. The honeymoon in Mauritius had been a dream come true. A quiet escape with her husband, Roman, after the whirlwind of their wedding. The warm sun, the calm turquoise waters, and the picture-perfect cove seemed worlds away from the cold streets of Moscow. That afternoon in 2013, the beach near their resort felt almost deserted, a secluded paradise where the hours drifted by slowly beneath a cloudless sky. Roman stayed on shore, stretched out on a towel with his camera, occasionally raising it to snap pictures of his wife as she moved further from the shore, her snorkel breaking the sea's glassy surface. Anastasia was relaxed, floating effortlessly, watching the sunlight ripple over the sandy seabed and the occasional flash of a fish darting beneath her. She had ventured farther than most tourists dared, away from the laughter and chatter of the shallow shallows, beyond the buoys that bobbed gently with the current. The water grew deeper beneath her, the color darkening almost imperceptibly as the cove sloped downward, a gradient of blue that felt peaceful rather than ominous. Unbeknownst to her, the area had been subject to quiet complaints from locals for months, whispers about fishermen and boats cleaning their catches near the rocky edges, leaving behind trails of blood and scraps that vanished quickly into the currents. Few visitors noticed these warnings, and Anastasia certainly hadn't heard them. The tiger shark patrolling the area was a large female, drawn closer to the shore by the alluring scent of discarded fish parts swirling in the water hours earlier. Opportunistic by nature and aggressive in its hunting style, the shark had been gliding through the deep, lazy yet alert, its senses finely tuned to any disturbance. When Anastasia kicked again, shifting her weight to adjust her snorkel, the vibrations rippled outward, subtle, but enough to catch the shark's attention. It moved closer, the distance between predator and prey closing beneath the quiet surface. Anastasia floated, oblivious, until a shadow shifted beneath her. In the clear water there was no sound, no splash, just a shape materializing from below, monstrous and fast. The first strike was brutal. The shark rose upward and latched onto her torso and upper thigh in a devastating bite, its powerful teeth crushing down through skin, muscle, and bone with horrifying force. Anastasia's body arched violently, instinctively twisting in agony as the sharp pain tore through her. The shock froze her muscles before terror and survival instincts exploded through her system. Blood burst into the water in a thick, expanding cloud of red, drifting in ragged plumes that curled upward like smoke. The salt stung her open wounds as she tried to scream, the sound garbled through the snorkel, barely carrying over the growing splashes of her struggle. On shore, Roman saw only haphazard movement, violent thrashing far beyond what he expected from casual swimming. The shape of his wife was still visible, but smaller now, distant and frantic. Then he saw the crimson haze spreading across the perfect blue, unnatural and sickening. His heart seized in his chest with paralyzing dread. The shark twisted its body in a savage, practiced motion, dragging Anastasia downward. Her leg, gripped firmly in the animal's serrated jaws, felt like it was being crushed in a vise of bone-snapping pressure. She clawed at the water, adrenaline surging, desperate to escape, but the predator's strength was overwhelming. Her snorkel was ripped away as her head submerged again and again, water flooding into her mouth and nose between silent, panicked gasps. Beachgoers began shouting from the sand, their voices a rising chorus of alarm as they recognized what was happening. The stillness of the idyllic afternoon shattered in seconds. Reacting to the unfolding horror, lifeguards sprinted toward a nearby rescue boat, their radios crackling as they called for emergency backup. Anastasia's body was weakening as the shark shook her again, stripping away her energy and life force. Every kick she managed felt slower, her strength slipping away as shock set in. Still, she fought, twisting her free leg, striking at the unyielding bulk beside her, her arms straining for the surface, air, and life. The salt water turned metallic in her mouth as more blood spread around her, darkening the sea until it was impossible to tell where she ended, and it began. The lifeguards reached her in what felt like an eternity but had been barely minutes. They swung poles from the side of the rescue boat, battering the shark in desperate, clumsy strikes, the blows landing hard against its rough sandpaper skin. The predator, agitated now by the noise and resistance, finally released its grip, vanishing as suddenly as it had appeared, its agile body slicing back into the deep. Lena's body floated limply in the water, her skin ghostly pale beneath the blood that pooled around her. Strong hands hauled her aboard, their movements practiced but frantic, faces drawn tight with urgency as they pressed towels and fabric against her wounds, trying to stop the relentless bleeding that pulsed from her torn leg and ravaged torso. Roman was barely aware of the boat's return to shore. His world narrowed to the broken shape of his wife lying before him, her breath shallow, her eyes fluttering weakly, her life draining despite their efforts. An ambulance waited on the sand, paramedics moving with cold precision as they transferred her to a stretcher, the siren beginning its mournful wail as they sped toward the hospital. But the damage had been too extensive. Anastasia's injuries, deep and catastrophic, had ravaged arteries, organs, and tissue beyond repair. She died en route, her heart finally giving way long before the hospital could save her. The aftermath sent shockwaves through the quiet resort town. News of the attack spread rapidly, sparking outrage and fear. Local authorities launched immediate investigations, and safety protocols that had long been neglected were scrutinized and overhauled. Signs were posted. Feeding near swimming areas was banned outright. Tour operators were forced to change practices. For Roman, the loss was unbearable. He had come to Mauritius to begin a life with the woman he loved, only to leave with memories stained forever by terror and grief. 11-year-old Sophie Lane had always been captivated by the mysteries of the ocean. Her room was adorned with posters of marine life, and her shelves overflowed with books about the sea's wonders. Her father, Eric, a seasoned diver with years of experience exploring underwater realms, had promised her that he would take her on her first ocean dive when she was ready. After months of training in local pools and shallow waters, the day had finally arrived. The two stood on the deck of a chartered dive boat off the coast of Monterey, California, the morning sun casting a golden hue over the calm sea. Eric meticulously checked their gear, ensuring every strap was secure and every gauge functioned properly. He was excited and anxious. This was a significant milestone for Sophie, and he wanted everything to be perfect. Sophie, clad in a slightly oversized wetsuit, her mask perched atop her head, couldn't contain her excitement. Her eyes sparkled with anticipation as she listened intently to her father's final instructions. The dive master gave them the go-ahead, and hand in hand they stepped off the boat, descending into the cool embrace of the Pacific. The underwater world unfolded in a mesmerizing display of colors and life. Schools of silvery fish darted around, while vibrant starfish clung to the rocky seabed. Sophie pointed enthusiastically at every new creature she spotted, her joy evident even through the regulator in her mouth. Eric watched her with pride, relishing this shared experience. They communicated through hand signals, with Eric guiding her deeper, vigilant and protective. Minutes into their descent, an unexpected shift in the water's ambiance occurred as they hovered near a particularly lively coral formation. The vibrant marine life seemed to retreat, and an eerie stillness settled around them. Eric felt a prickle of unease but dismissed it, focusing instead on Sophie, who was engrossed in observing a playful sea lion nearby. And the water beneath him, from the murky depths beyond their visibility, a terrifying shape materialized as quickly as lightning, cutting through a great white shark, its torpedo-like body moving with predatory grace, surged toward them. Before Eric could react, the shark collided with Sophie. In an instant, its jaws clamped onto the girl's side. The force of the impact sent a shockwave through the water, and a cloud of crimson began to spread, obscuring Eric's vision. Panic surged through Eric's veins as he lunged toward his daughter, his mind racing with a cacophony of fear and desperation. He grabbed Sophie, noting the ragged tear in her wetsuit and the alarming amount of blood escaping into the water. The shark, perhaps startled by the resistance or the unfamiliar sensation, released Sophie and disappeared back into the gloom as swiftly as it had appeared. Eric's training kicked in. He secured Sophie in his grasp, her body limp and unresponsive, and began a rapid ascent toward the surface. Every kick was fueled by adrenaline, his muscles burning as he propelled them upward. The ascent seemed interminable, the surface a distant, shimmering barrier between life and death. Blood trailed behind them, a stark reminder of the urgency. Eric's mind was a whirlwind of prayers and pleas, willing his daughter to hold on. Breaking through the surface, Eric gasped for air, his cries muffled by the surrounding waves. The dive boat was already in motion, and the crew had witnessed the commotion and responded with practiced urgency. A lifebuoy was thrown, and Eric maneuvered Sophie toward it, his strength waning but his determination unwavering. Hands reached down, pulling Sophie aboard, followed swiftly by Eric. The deck became a flurry of activity. A crew member trained in emergency medical procedures assessed Sophie's injuries. A deep laceration ran along her side, the bleeding profuse. Gauze and towels were pressed firmly against the wound, the pressure aimed at staunching the flow of blood. Eric knelt beside her, his hands trembling as he stroked her damp hair, whispering words of comfort and encouragement, though terror gripped his heart. The boat sped toward the shore, the coastline a blur. Emergency services had been alerted via radio, and an ambulance awaited their arrival. Paramedics took over, and their movements were efficient and coordinated. Eric was ushered into the ambulance alongside Sophie, his hand never leaving hers. The ride to the hospital was a blur of sirens and flashing lights, his mind oscillating between hope and despair. Hours in the operating room felt like an eternity. Surgeons worked meticulously to repair the damage, and their faces were masked. Eric paced the waiting room, every minute stretching endlessly. Finally, a doctor emerged, exhaustion evident in his posture, but a reassuring smile on his face. Sophie had survived the surgery. The road to recovery would be long and arduous, but she was alive. The incident sent shockwaves through the local community and the broader diving world. Discussions about the risks of diving in areas known for shark activity intensified. Monterey, part of the infamous Red Triangle, was recognized for its significant population of great white sharks drawn by the abundant marine life. While such occurrences were rare, the reality of their possibility became starkly evident. Once an avid diver, Eric could not return to the sport. The memories were too vivid, the what-ifs too haunting. He channeled his energy into supporting Sophie through her recovery, attending physical and psychological therapy sessions, and ensuring she had every resource needed to heal. Despite the trauma, Sophie swore to return to the ocean, but never without a cage. Tina Ray, 26, had always been drawn to the sea. A marine biology student from Melbourne, she had spent years studying the creatures of the deep, particularly the ones that most people feared. The southern coast of Australia, wild and rugged, called to her like no other place. It was beautiful but dangerous. A stretch of coastline where cliffs rose like sentinels over kelp-choked coves, and the water ran cold and deep. That morning, the sky was overcast, casting a soft gray light over the glassy surface of the sea. Tina launched her bright red kayak from a hidden inlet, eager to spend the day observing marine life just beyond the kelp line. 100 meters inland, perched on a rocky ledge above the water, stood Jordan Ellis, 42, a local wildlife photographer who had come to the coast hoping to photograph a pod of dolphins known to pass through the area. He had seen Tina paddle out from the beach below. He didn't know her name then, but he admired the ease with which she moved across the water, her strokes steady, confident. She paused at the edge of the kelp forest and let the current carry her slightly farther out. Her kayak bobbed gently with the swell. He lifted his camera and zoomed in on her. There was something peaceful in the way she sat there, scanning the water, completely alone. Then she leaned over the side, peering into the depths, likely searching for fish or tracking something in the underwater forest. Jordan watched, lowering the camera slightly. He had seen others kayak here before, but something about her, young, focused, so clearly immersed in the world around her, held his attention longer than usual. The sea exploded. It happened without warning. 1 second, Tina's kayak floated in still water. The next, it was airborne, thrown violently upward by something massive and unseen. Jordan flinched, instinctively jerking the camera up to his face. Through the lens, he caught a glimpse of a dark gray blur, an immense form rising out of the water beneath the kayak. There was a thunderous splash, and the kayak split in two, its shattered plastic spinning through the air like confetti. Tina was flung skyward, limbs flailing. She was screaming. Jordan froze, disbelief pinning him to the ledge. Before she could even hit the water again, a shape burst upward from the foam, a great white shark, enormous beyond reason, its mouth open impossibly wide. It twisted mid-leap, and in one savage lunge it caught her in the air. The shark slammed back into the water with a crash, dragging her down in a whirl of spray and blood. The surface stilled too quickly, as if the sea had closed over her like a curtain. Jordan's camera slipped from his hands and hit the rocks. He stood motionless, eyes wide, scanning the sea for any sign she was still alive. The water churned red for a moment, then returned to its dark color. The only trace of her was a lone piece of kayak hull spinning slowly in the swell. He fumbled for his phone, hands shaking, and called emergency services, voice cracking as he tried to explain what he had just seen. The dispatcher asked him to repeat it twice. He kept watching the water. His eyes caught movement. At first he thought it might be her, but it wasn't. A dorsal fin cut the surface, long and slow, slicing through the water like a blade. The shark was still there, circling. It was massive, easily over 20 feet. It moved calmly with the confidence of something that had just dominated its world. Authorities arrived hours later. Helicopters swept the coastline. A drone was launched, and from high above it captured the shark still gliding through the same waters, undisturbed and unbothered. Tina's body was never recovered. Her life vest washed ashore, torn and bloodied. Pieces of her kayak littered the beach. Divers searched but found nothing else. The sea had taken her completely. Jordan gave his statement, detailing every moment as he remembered it. But retelling it didn't ease the horror. The image was burned into his mind. Her in the air. The shark beneath her, jaws wide like some prehistoric weapon, catching her before she could fall. It had been so fast, so precise. There had been no struggle. The sea had swallowed her in a single moment. Later he learned her name. Tina Ray, a marine biology student. A woman who had dedicated her life to understanding the very creature that took it from her. She had been studying the migration patterns of great whites, fascinated by their intelligence and dominance in the marine food chain. She had likely known the risks, but no one could anticipate that kind of ambush. Experts analyzed the attack and confirmed the shark's size, at least 23 feet, an apex predator in its prime. They believed it mistook the kayak for a seal from below, using its classic vertical ambush strategy. Once committed, the bite was terminal, a test, a strike. Not necessarily out of hunger, but curiosity and instinct sharpened over millions of years. The public reaction was divided. Some called for the shark to be hunted down. Others, especially marine scientists, urged restraint. They reminded everyone that Tina had gone to those waters, understanding the reality of the ocean. She had entered the predator's domain. It had acted as it was built to. Jordan stayed quiet through most of it, but he returned often to that ledge, unable to forget what he had seen. Weeks passed. The shark was sighted again. Same dorsal fin, same size. It moved along the kelp edge like a ghost. Some locals stopped going near the water. Others said the shark carried her spirit now, forever roaming the place where she was lost. A legend grew around the cove. Fishermen called it cursed. Tourists asked where it happened, but Jordan never showed them. He stopped taking photos of the sea. He would never forget the moment the ocean erupted. The way time slowed. The arc of her body through the air. The gaping mouth rose to meet her. The finality of that splash. He had seen many wild things in his career, but nothing came close to that moment. And nothing ever would, because that wasn't just a death. It was a vanishing. Ethan Clark, 35, had always chased the edges of the wild. A seasoned diver and amateur underwater photographer from Seattle, he had explored reefs from Indonesia to Belize, always drawn to the mysteries that lived where light faded and silence thickened. He wasn't a thrill seeker, at least not in the traditional sense. What pulled him below the surface was the alien stillness, the floating calm. It was control, beauty, the unknown. That night off the coast of Fiji, Ethan prepared for a solo night dive. He had been staying at a remote eco-lodge, and while others gathered around fires on the beach, he slipped into his wetsuit in near silence. The air was thick and warm, stars smothered by heavy clouds. The boat that dropped him off bobbed quietly 100 meters offshore. He descended slowly, flashlight beam slicing through the dark. His goal was to photograph bioluminescent plankton that lit up in ghostly swirls. He'd chosen this reef after hearing about a series of underwater caves and crevices teeming with life. He loved night dives. The darkness stripped the ocean of color, but made it more alive in other ways. Every shadow could move, every shape had potential. And on this night, something was already watching him. At 30 feet, Ethan hovered near the sandy bottom. He moved carefully, following the reef's jagged edge. He shone his light over brain coral and sea fans, waiting for the glowing plankton to react. Fish darted away from the beam. Crabs froze in the glare. The world felt hushed, as if waiting. Then he saw it. A shape emerged from the gloom, broad, smooth, and impossibly quiet. A tiger shark, at least 10 feet long, drifted into the edge of his light. Its stripes shimmered faintly, its massive head swinging slowly from side to side. It didn't charge, it didn't flee, it simply appeared. Ethan's breath caught in his throat. He stayed still, muscles locked. He knew the species, opportunistic, curious, powerful. Not necessarily aggressive, but not predictable either. The shark circled once, keeping just beyond the brightest part of his flashlight beam. Ethan turned slowly, watching it, refusing to let it out of his sight. It moved like smoke effortlessly. His heart pounded in his chest, loud in his ears. But the shark moved on. It vanished into the dark. He floated there a moment longer. The water pressed in cold despite the wetsuit. The tension clung to him. He should have surfaced, but he wanted the shot. He moved deeper, descending into a narrow channel lined with overhangs and cave-like formations. He'd read about this place in a diver's forum, glowing pockets of plankton that needed darkness and silence to reveal themselves. He drifted into the narrow space and turned off his light for a few seconds to let his eyes adjust. As he waited, faint green pinpricks began to appear, trailing around him like dust in a sunbeam. He smiled behind his mask. Worth it. Then came the jolt. From behind, something struck him, hard and fast. He was spun forward and slammed into the cave wall. His flashlight clattered to the bottom. The light spun, beams slashing sideways across the reef. He kicked hard, instincts roaring to life, but something was already gripping his arm. A flash of agony tore through him as the teeth cut deep into muscle. The tiger shark had returned, and this time it wasn't curious. It shook him violently, pulling him against the jagged stone. His arm screamed with pain as his wetsuit shredded. He grabbed at his belt, fingers slick, and found his dive knife. With his other hand pinned in the shark's jaws, he swung the blade upward. The knife struck the shark's head once, twice. On the third strike, he hit the eye. The shark released him. It twisted in the narrow space, vanishing into the dark. Ethan kicked away, arm limp and streaming blood. The water turned murky, filled with clouded red and flaring light. He grabbed the flashlight and turned it toward the exit. No time to check the wound, no time to stop the bleeding. He had to get out. The surface felt impossibly far away. Every kick burned. His injured arm hung uselessly at his side. The light faded fast as he rose. Behind him, something moved. He could feel it. The water changed when something big passed through it, and he felt that pressure again. But the shark didn't strike a second time. He broke the surface, gasping, rolling onto his back as he pulled out his emergency whistle and flared his light. The boat was a speck. A figure waved, then shouted. Relief swelled in Ethan's chest, but so did something colder. Fear that the blood might draw the shark back, that it might breach the surface, jaws open again. He reached the boat, arms barely functioning. The crew hauled him on board. His wetsuit was in tatters, his arm a mess of slashes and punctures. Blood soaked the deck. The boat sped toward the shore, radio crackling with urgency. At the hospital, surgeons worked through the night to save the limb. Tendons were torn. The muscle was missing, but no arteries had been severed. The doctor said it was a miracle. Ethan didn't feel lucky. He felt changed, shaken in a way no surface dweller would ever understand. Experts later examined the incident. They believed the shark had initially been cautious, investigating the unfamiliar light and vibrations. But the confined cave environment, combined with the flashing camera rig and Ethan's movement, may have triggered a defensive or territorial response. Tiger sharks were unpredictable, especially in shadowy, narrow spaces. The footage on his camera, recovered and mostly intact, showed only glimpses of what had happened. A dark shape, a fast blur, then chaos. Ethan never dove alone again. He still filmed marine life, but always in pairs, always in open water. People asked him what it felt like to be bitten, to be that close to death. He never gave them the answer they wanted, because the truth was, it wasn't the pain that haunted him. It was the silence before the strike, the way the ocean swallowed sound and feeling until only the violence remained. It was the moment he realized that down there, in the dark, you are never the top of the food chain, and that sometimes beauty bites back. The sun blazed above the beach, its heat rippling the air like a furnace. The sand was scorching and the waves crashed in a rhythmic pattern, as if the ocean itself was keeping time with the pulse of the world. It was the perfect day for a beach volleyball match, and Marco was eager to make the most of it. A light breeze rolled in from the ocean, offering some relief from the midday heat as his friends set up the net. Marco was 25, fit and lean, with a competitive streak that could make any game feel like a battle for his life. He grinned as he slapped his palms together, the excitement palpable in his eyes. His friends laughed and joked around him as they divided into teams. It was just another casual game, just another day spent in the sun, far from the worries of the world. The beach was crowded, filled with tourists and families enjoying the vibrant, sunlit afternoon. But Marco barely noticed them. His focus was on the game, on the ball, on spiking it over the net with as much force as he could muster. He served first, sending the ball flying with a powerful swing. The game quickly picked up speed, and with each hit, the stakes seemed to rise. Marco's team was ahead, laughing as they made an impressive series of shots. His friend Sarah, a sprightly 24-year-old woman with sharp eyes, challenged him at every turn. She was fast, competitive, and one of the best players he'd ever faced, even in casual games. But Marco was determined to win today, perhaps as much to prove something to himself as to anyone else. They played for hours, the game heating up under the fierce sun. Sweat glistened on Marco's back, and the salty ocean air clung to his skin. He felt alive in the moment, his movements fluid, his body pushing to its limits. He spiked the ball with an aggressive jump, laughing as Sarah lunged for it but missed. His team cheered, but as the game progressed, Marco found himself drawn to the water. The waves seemed inviting, cooling and comforting after the match's intensity. The ball bounced off the sand, carrying further out into the surf, and Marco immediately dashed toward the ocean to retrieve it. Sarah laughed as she followed him. Marco's bare feet pounded the hot sand as he sprinted into the shallow water, the coolness of the waves washing over his ankles. He swam out further, diving under the breaking waves to chase the ball. The current tugged at him, pulling him farther from the shore with each stroke. But as he reached for the ball, something shifted beneath the surface. The water, once clear and inviting, grew darker. Marco's chest tightened with an uneasy sensation he couldn't shake. He had swum out this far before, but today something felt different. The waves seemed louder, the water colder. He pushed it from his mind, focusing on the ball. Just as his fingers brushed the ball, a sudden rush of pressure gripped his legs. Marco froze. His heart skipped a beat as his instinct screamed at him to swim back to shore. He turned his head just in time to see a massive dorsal fin cutting through the water with terrifying precision. It was too close. A massive bull shark surged upward, its mouth opening wide as it lunged for him. The force of the strike sent Marco flying through the water, his legs gripped in the shark's jaws like a vice. Panic surged in his chest as the shark's teeth sank deep into his flesh. The ocean swallowed his scream as the pain shot through him in jagged waves. Instinct took over. Marco kicked, his arms flailing wildly, trying to free himself from the shark's grip. He felt its massive body thrash around him, its powerful tail sweeping the water into a frenzy. His legs were locked in the predator's grip, the crushing pressure almost unbearable as it began dragging him further out. Everything happened in a blur. The world around him spun as he was pulled deeper, away from the safety of the shore. His friends on the beach were shouting, but the rushing water drowned out their voices. Sarah screamed from the shoreline, but Marco's focus was solely on surviving. His body went into shock, his muscles failing to respond, his vision beginning to blur from the shock. He kicked again, desperate. He reached for anything he could grasp, anything to break free. His hands grasped at the water, at the shark's sleek, rough skin. But it was futile. Every time he tried to move, the shark responded by tightening its grip, dragging him down. The shark jerked, a violent motion that felt like his bones might snap. He fought back, flailing against the water, trying to break free from the vice-like grip of its jaws. His body was on autopilot, his mind screaming at him to survive. His foot made contact with the shark's side. For a split second it loosened its grip. But then the shark twisted violently, dragging Marco down with it. He was no longer in control. The water seemed to close over him, cold and suffocating. The world became a swirling mess of dark water, blood, and pain. He kicked once more, but the force of the shark's attack dragged him farther under. It was over. There was no escape. His lifeless body was pulled deeper into the depths, the water clouding around him. On the shore, Sarah stood frozen, her hand still stretched out as if she could reach him, as if the moment could be stopped, reversed. She could hear nothing now, only the pounding of her own heart. She screamed again, but the sound seemed to vanish into the vastness of the ocean. She ran toward the water, but it was too late. The others on the beach had already dialed the authorities. The frantic energy in the air was palpable, but there was nothing they could do about it. The shark had struck, and Marco was gone. The beach was thrown into chaos. Police arrived, helicopters circled, and divers were sent to search the waters. But the ocean had taken what it wanted. Hours passed, but Marco's body was never found. The shark had taken him into the deep, leaving only a few fleeting traces behind, bits of clothing, torn flesh, and the indelible memory of his final, violent struggle. In the days that followed, the resort and the surrounding beach were closed. Tourists were escorted away. The ocean, once a place of peace and beauty, had become a dangerous reminder of nature's raw power. A bull shark, once a myth in the stories told around bonfires, was now a real threat, lurking somewhere in the depths, waiting for its next victim. And as for Sarah, the image of Marco's desperate final fight would haunt her forever. No one could take the terror she had witnessed, the sound of the ocean swallowing him whole. The beach would never be the same again. The sea had taken him, and off the coast of Oregon was wild. It was the kind of place where the sea seemed endless, stretching into the horizon like a gray expanse of uncertainty. Alex Moore, 29, had fished these waters his entire life. But that didn't mean he ever took the ocean lightly. The unpredictable tides, the relentless pull of the currents, and the deep, cold water all spoke to the raw power of the sea. Alex had learned to respect the hard way. On this particular morning, Alex and his small crew set out early aboard their fishing boat, a modest vessel designed for deep-sea expeditions. The air was sharp and cool as they navigated through the fog. The water was eerily still, the kind of calm that made you feel like something was waiting beneath. The crew worked together, their tasks routine and well-practiced. Alex was the first mate, guiding the others as they set out their lines. A calm but focused man, he took pride in his work. Their target that day was halibut, prized for its size and value. But something was off about the day. There was a weight in the air, a sense that the ocean was holding its breath. Alex noticed it first, a sudden shiver in his gut, but he dismissed it. Fishermen were often overly cautious, and he wasn't one to give in to superstitions. As the boat drifted further from the coast, the fog thickened, shrouding everything in a damp gray mist. The boat's engine hummed steadily as Alex leaned over the edge, his hands working to reel in the lines. His crewman Tom stood nearby, adjusting the gear. The ocean around them felt oppressive, as if the fog had swallowed up all sound, leaving nothing but the distant murmur of waves. It was when Alex bent over the side to check the bait that he first saw it, a shadow in the water. He froze. It moved slowly beneath the surface, a dark, ominous shape gliding silently through the murk. Alex's heart skipped a beat. His eyes narrowed and instinct kicked in. The size of the shape was unmistakable. It was big, far too big for anything in the area, especially this close to the boat. At first he thought it was a whale or perhaps a giant sea lion, but something about the shape felt wrong. There was a smoothness to it, a predatory elegance. It was a shark, massive, unmistakable, and circling. Tom didn't hear when Alex called his name. The engine roared to life as the captain adjusted the throttle, but Alex didn't take his eyes off the shadow. The shark was moving toward them, its sleek body cutting effortlessly through the water. It didn't rush. It didn't seem particularly interested in the boat. It just circled. But that was enough. In these waters, circling could mean one thing. Alex called again, more forcefully this time. Tom turned, his face a mixture of curiosity and confusion. He followed Alex's gaze. Tom asked what was happening. Before Alex could answer, the shape surged upward, rising from the depths like a missile. It was a great white, its massive body almost half the length of the boat. Its enormous head broke the surface with a terrifying force, mouth wide, teeth glistening in the pale light. Alex screamed, his voice raw with panic as the shark slammed into the boat, sending a shockwave of violent motion through the hull. The impact was deafening. The boat lurched under the force of the strike, the wood groaning, the engine sputtering as the shark made another pass, this time brushing against the side. Its sheer size was overwhelming. Alex staggered back, his heart hammering in his chest as the shark circled again. It was testing them, circling closer, its dorsal fin cutting the surface like a knife. Alex's mind raced. He could feel the tension building in his muscles as adrenaline pumped through his veins. The shark wasn't attacking, but it wasn't backing off either. It was toying with them, its massive body rolling in the water with casual ease. Alex whispered to himself to stay calm, though he wasn't sure if he was trying to convince Tom or himself. The shark made another pass, this time striking the boat again, harder. And this time it wasn't just the boat rocking. A splintering sound echoed through the air as the shark's teeth scraped the hull, leaving visible gouges in the wood. The ship groaned under the pressure, and Alex's heart skipped a beat. It was too much. If it hit again like that, the boat would be at risk of capsizing. Tom scrambled to pull the lines up, his hands shaking. The boat was now rocking with each movement of the shark, the creaking of the wood making the situation feel even more unstable. Alex watched the shark as it made another slow pass. It was no longer circling. It was preparing for something, and Alex knew it wasn't just a random encounter anymore. The vibrations had drawn the shark away from the fishing lines and the thrashing fish, and it was now testing its prey. The shark lunged again, but this time Alex was ready. He grabbed the closest weapon, a gaff hook, and swung it with all his might, trying to ward off the predator. The shark's eyes gleamed, almost calculating as it twisted and darted away at the last moment, narrowly avoiding the hook. Alex shouted, pushing Tom toward the safety of the boat's interior. Tom hesitated, eyes wide with fear, but Alex's urgency made him move. He climbed into the cabin, peeking out through the window, and Alex followed him, keeping his eyes on the water. They watched as the shark continued to circle. It wasn't giving up. The massive predator moved with terrifying grace, its every movement sending shivers down their spines. But strangely, it didn't make another attack. After what felt like an eternity, the shark gave one final pass, its body moving slowly beneath the boat as it descended into the depths. The tension in the air loosened, but only slightly. Alex didn't let his guard down. He kept his eyes trained on the water, waiting for another strike, but it never came. The shark had vanished. It wasn't until an hour later, as they finally made their way back to shore, that Alex's body began to shake uncontrollably. He wasn't sure if it was the cold, the terror, or the fact that the shark had almost breached the boat. But the adrenaline was fading and reality was starting to set in. He had just come face to face with one of the ocean's most dangerous creatures, and survived. Back at the dock, the crew members were waiting. They were eager to hear about the day's catch, but when they saw Alex's pale face and the strained look in his eyes, they knew something was wrong. Alex realized they had been lucky. He had survived an encounter with one of nature's most formidable predators. But he would never forget the cold, calculating eyes of the shark, or the way it had circled silently, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. The cave system off Florida's coast was a photographer's paradise, or at least it was supposed to be. Julia Meeks, 32, a professional underwater photographer known for her striking images of marine life, had dived into these caves countless times. Her dive had started as planned. Julia was in the water alone, her breathing steady through the regulator, her body lithe and efficient as she glided through the narrow passageways. She had come to capture the glowing plankton that flourished in the caves, their bioluminescence creating an ethereal glow in the dark water. She moved with grace, the underwater world unfolding around her as she set up her camera for a long exposure shot. The faint blue-green light cast everything in an otherworldly glow. Julia had been diving for over a decade, but even she couldn't ignore the growing tension in the water. The currents were stronger today, and the water was less clear than usual. It wasn't uncommon for things to shift in these caves, hidden pockets of current, sudden drops in temperature. But this felt different. She shook it off, focusing on the shot in front of her. She had a job to do, and she wasn't about to let anything distract her. But as she floated motionless, the silence grew heavy, and something wasn't right. The murky water around her seemed to thicken, almost as if it were closing in. Julia adjusted her position, trying to steady her breath as she aimed her camera. She couldn't help but feel a sense of unease creeping up her spine, the kind of feeling you get when you're being watched. But she told herself it was nothing, just the natural anxiety that comes with diving in these murky waters. Then she felt it.
A sudden jolt from behind. It was subtle at first, just a brush against her flippers, a slight disturbance in the water. Her heart skipped a beat, but she dismissed it quickly. It was probably a fish, a passing stingray maybe. She was used to the movements of creatures around her, but then it happened again, this time stronger. Julia whipped around, her heart pounding in her chest, and that's when she saw it. A shadow. It moved quickly and her pulse spiked as it emerged from the gloom. The shape was massive, long and sleek, its movements quick and calculated. Julia's breath caught in her throat as she realized what it was. A bull shark. Its eyes locked onto hers, dark and unreadable, and she froze. The shark moved with terrifying purpose, its body slicing through the water with a fluidity that seemed unnatural. It circled her once, its enormous form gliding in a tight arc, then disappeared back into the murk. Julia's mind raced. Bull sharks were known to be aggressive, territorial, and unpredictable. In these confined, dark spaces, they were even more dangerous. She knew she had to keep calm, but her instincts were screaming at her to flee. Her hand instinctively reached for her camera, her fingers trembling. She didn't want to startle the shark, but the shot she could capture, if she lived to tell the tale, was worth more than anything she had ever shot. But there was no time. The shark was back, and it was faster this time, darting out of the darkness with an explosive burst of movement. It struck, its teeth flashing white in the dim light. The impact was swift, a violent collision that sent Julia spinning in the water. The shark's powerful jaws clamped down on her shoulder, its teeth sinking into the thick wetsuit material, but not deep enough to reach her skin. Yet, she gasped, fighting to regain control of her spinning body. The shock of the initial strike left her momentarily disoriented, but survival instincts kicked in. Julia kicked hard, pushing herself away from the shark with all her strength, her legs thrashing in the water. She reached for her dive knife, strapped to her thigh, but the water around her had turned into a whirlpool of confusion. The shark circled again, its eyes now wide with predatory focus, its movements methodical. She had to get out, but the cave system was too tight, the walls pressing in on her. There was no easy escape, no open water to flee to. She was trapped, and the shark knew it. It darted in again, coming from the right this time, a flash of silver and muscle. Julia barely had time to react. She swung the dive knife in a desperate wide arc, the blade grazing the shark's side. The shark recoiled momentarily, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it pressed closer, its body a shadow of menace in the murk. The water around Julia churned with the violence of the encounter. Her heart raced, each beat echoing in her ears as she fought to stay calm. The shark lunged again, its jaws closing on her shoulder once more, this time sinking deep into the wetsuit. The pain was sharp and immediate, but Julia's training kicked in. She twisted her body violently, breaking free from the shark's grip and managing to turn her back to the wall of the cave. Her vision was blurred from the shock, and blood, her own, clouded the water. She felt the warmth of it trickling down her arm, but there was no time to assess the damage. The shark, undeterred, circled again, faster this time. Julia could feel its presence in the water, could feel its cold gaze on her, even through the murky haze. It was waiting, sizing her up, perhaps looking for an opening. In that moment, Julia made a choice. She had to make it out. She had to survive. With a final burst of adrenaline, Julia kicked hard toward the small gap in the cave's wall she had seen earlier. The shark followed, but it was slower now, perhaps surprised by her sudden movement. She reached the narrow gap and wedged herself into it, squeezing her body into the tight opening, trying to push herself further into the dark tunnel. The shark hit the wall behind her, its force sending a shock of vibration through the water. For a few seconds, the world was silent. Julia stayed perfectly still, her breath shallow and controlled, praying the shark would lose interest. The water was thick with blood now, and she knew it wouldn't be long before the shark came back. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, the shark seemed to vanish into the darkness. It wasn't until she could no longer hear the shark's movements that she edged her way out of the gap and made her way toward the exit, her legs weak but still functional. By the time Julia surfaced, the first light of dawn was breaking through the cave's entrance. Her dive team, frantic with worry, helped her out of the water. Her shoulder was torn and she was bleeding heavily, but she was alive. Her dive team rushed her to the hospital, where surgeons were able to save her arm. Kelp forests off California's coast were a world of shadows and soft green sways, teeming with life, where every turn revealed something new. Lucas Walker, 28, was an experienced diver who had been drawn to the ocean's mysteries for as long as he could remember. On this night dive, he wasn't hunting for treasures or chasing elusive creatures. His goal was simple: document the behavior of fish with a powerful underwater flashlight. The water was cold and dark as expected, but the flashlight's beam cut through the blackness, casting an eerie glow on the kelp that danced with the movement of the current. Lucas had been diving for over an hour, photographing schools of fish and taking note of their patterns. He had seen sharks in these waters before, but they were usually just shadows, darting in and out of the beam. He didn't think much of them. That was until the beam of light shifted. Lucas swept the flashlight across a rocky outcrop, capturing the swirling movement of fish when he noticed something odd, a large dark shape gliding just beyond the beam. For a moment, he thought it was just the current playing tricks on his eyes. But then the shape came closer, a great white shark, its massive body moving with unnerving precision. It was over 15 feet long, its dorsal fin cutting through the water like a sharp blade. Lucas froze, his heart racing. The shark's eyes locked onto the light. For a split second, Lucas thought the shark would swim away, but it didn't. Instead, it moved closer, almost as if drawn to the beam of light. The shark seemed confused but curious. It glided slowly, almost lazily, like it was stalking its prey. Lucas didn't dare move, unsure of what the shark might do next. The attack was a blur, fast and brutal. Its jaws opened wide, snapping at the beam of light, mistaking it for prey. Lucas had only a moment to react. The flashlight was yanked from his hands, the shark's powerful bite tearing through the water as it lunged at the source of light. The force of the bite sent Lucas tumbling backward, spinning in the water. His heart hammered in his chest as panic set in. The shark's teeth barely missed him, its enormous jaws snapping just inches from his legs. The water around him churned violently, bubbles rising like a storm. He struggled to regain his bearings, disoriented by the powerful surge. The shark was no longer just a curious observer, it was actively hunting, its massive form circling again, eyes fixed on him. The beam of light was gone, but the shark was still there, circling, sizing him up as though trying to decide if he was worth the chase. Lucas kicked hard, pushing himself backward. His fins barely caught the current as he moved toward a patch of kelp, hoping to find cover. But the shark followed, gliding with effortless speed through the water. His mind raced. He couldn't outrun it. His only chance was to make himself look as unthreatening as possible, to avoid triggering its hunting instincts. He knew that sharks didn't often attack unless provoked, but that didn't mean they wouldn't. Lucas's breath was ragged in his regulator as he slowly backed into the kelp, hoping it would offer some protection. The shark was getting closer now, its massive body looming in the dark water. It circled once, twice, moving with an eerie patience. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest, his body frozen, waiting. Then just as suddenly as it had appeared, the shark stopped. It hovered for a moment, its eyes watching, and for a split second Lucas thought it might turn away. But the silence stretched on, the tension unbearable. And then, without warning, the shark darted away into the darkness, vanishing as quickly as it had come. Lucas stayed motionless for several long moments, trying to steady his breath. It was over. Lucas slowly surfaced, gasping for air as the dark ocean water gave way to the first hints of dawn. His heart was still racing, his mind trying to process the close call. The shark had only been reacting to the light. It wasn't hunting him. It had been drawn to the flash of movement, thinking it was prey. But the encounter had left him shaken. In that moment, Lucas realized how close he had come to death, and how easy it was for the ocean to remind you that it was still in control.
April 3, 2025. The waters off South Africa's Cape of Goodwill were deceptively calm. Russian businessman Vadim Petrov had brought his $2 million luxury yacht, the Volga Princess, to these waters as part of an extended family vacation with his wife Alina and their 12-year-old son Nikolai. The Cape of Goodwill had been peaceful for their journey until that afternoon. The Cape, forming the meeting point between the Atlantic and Indian Oceans, had long been notorious for its treacherous conditions. Many vessels throughout history had met their doom attempting to navigate these waters. However, modern navigation technology had made the journey significantly safer, and the Petrov family had enjoyed smooth sailing since departing from Cape Town 3 days prior. Vadim had made his fortune in renewable energy technologies back in Moscow, and had purchased the yacht just 6 months earlier. The family's goal was simple: circumnavigate Africa during Nikolai's school break, combining education with adventure. They had hired local guides for portions of their journey, but were alone on this particular day, having developed confidence in their seafaring abilities. As they sailed approximately 15 nautical miles from shore, Vadim spotted movement in the distance. At first, he thought it might be dolphins, which they had encountered frequently during their voyage. Alina called Nikolai to the deck, always eager to share wildlife sightings with their son, who had developed a passion for marine biology during their trip. What approached was not a pod of dolphins, but a large orca, its distinctive black and white markings visible as it breached the surface. The family watched in amazement, having never encountered an orca in the wild before. Vadim reached for his camera while Alina and Nikolai leaned against the starboard railing for a better view. Their amazement quickly turned to concern when the orca changed course, heading directly toward their vessel. Marine biologists had documented increasing incidents of orcas interacting with boats in these waters, but the Petrovs were unaware of this phenomenon. The massive creature, estimated later to be over 20 feet long and weighing several tons, disappeared beneath the surface momentarily before ramming into the yacht's rudder with tremendous force. The impact threw the vessel off balance, causing it to lurch violently to one side. Dishes crashed in the galley below, and the family struggled to maintain their footing on the suddenly tilting deck before they could recover from the initial shock. A second orca, previously unnoticed and likely part of the same pod, struck the hull with an even greater force. The second impact created a jarring jolt that sent both Alina and Nikolai tumbling over the railing and into the cold Atlantic waters. Vadim shouted in panic as he watched his family plunge into the ocean. Without hesitation, He grabbed 2 life vests and jumped in after them. The water was a frigid 55 degrees Fahrenheit, immediately sapping warmth from their bodies. Vadim reached Nikolai first, helping the frightened boy into a life vest while scanning the churning waters for his wife. He spotted Alina about 20 yards away, struggling to stay afloat as one of the orcas circled her. Swimming with desperate strokes, Vadim pushed through the water toward his wife. The orca made another pass, this time brushing against Alina with enough force to submerge her momentarily. When she resurfaced, she was visibly injured, blood staining the water around her legs where the orca's rough skin had scraped her. Vadim reached her side, helping her into the remaining life vest while keeping a terrified eye on the circling predators. The yacht, though damaged, remained afloat, but Vadim realized they couldn't risk trying to climb back aboard with the aggressive orcas still present. Instead, he guided his family toward the vessel's emergency lifeboat, which had been partially deployed during the impact. With tremendous effort, Vadim managed to get both Alina and Nikolai into the small craft before pulling himself aboard. Alina's injuries, while not life-threatening, consisted of deep abrasions along both legs requiring immediate attention. Vadim used the first aid kit to clean and bandage her wounds as best he could, while Nikolai, despite his young age, worked to deploy the lifeboat's emergency beacon. For the next 3 hours, the family huddled together in the lifeboat, watching in disbelief as the orcas continued to ram their yacht. The vessel, built with multiple watertight compartments, managed to stay afloat despite sustaining significant damage. Throughout their ordeal, Vadim maintained contact with emergency services via the lifeboat's radio, providing updates on their position and condition. As dusk approached, the South African Maritime Safety Authority dispatched a rescue vessel from Cape Town. By this time, the orcas had finally disappeared into the depths, having lost interest in the disabled yacht. The rescue team located the Petrov family using the emergency beacon signal, finding them cold and shaken but alive. Medical personnel immediately attended to Alina's injuries upon their arrival at Cape Town Harbor, determining that while she would need several stitches and would carry scars from the encounter, she had avoided any critical damage to muscles or tendons. Marine biologists who interviewed the family afterward explained that such orca behavior, while increasingly documented in certain regions, remained mysterious, with theories ranging from playful curiosity to territorial defense. The Petrov family's $2 million yacht was later recovered, but deemed beyond economic repair. Insurance investigators documented extensive damage to the hull, rudder system, and internal mechanics. The incident contributed to ongoing discussions among maritime authorities about issuing advisories regarding orca activities in the region. 6 months after the incident, with physical wounds healed, but memories still vivid, Vadim Petrov published an account of their experience in a Russian sailing magazine. Rather than expressing bitterness about their loss, the article reflected on humanity's place in the natural world and the unpredictability of wild animal encounters. Nikolai, perhaps most affected by the event, redirected his interest in marine biology, specifically toward the study of orca behavior, determined to better understand the creatures that had so dramatically altered his family's journey. In August 2017, the waters surrounding Cape Town, South Africa, were particularly active with marine life due to an unusual upwelling that had brought nutrient-rich cold water to the surface. This natural phenomenon had attracted diverse sea creatures to the area, making it an ideal time for diving enthusiasts to explore the underwater wonders. Cape Town's diving spots had long been famous for their biodiversity and shipwrecks, drawing adventure seekers from around the world, including experienced divers looking for the thrill of night exploration. Among these enthusiasts was 29-year-old marine photographer Claire Hargrove from Brisbane, Australia. Claire had built a respectable reputation in underwater photography over 7 years, with her work featured in several nature magazines. She had traveled to South Africa specifically to document nocturnal marine life around the historic shipwreck of the steamship Thermopylae Sierra, a cargo vessel that had sunk in 1991 after hitting a reef during a storm. The diving company, Ocean Explorers, had organized a specialized night dive for 6 experienced divers, including Claire. Their experienced guide, Thabo Mbeki, had conducted over 300 dives at this location and was well versed in the local marine conditions. The group also included Swedish marine biologist Sven Lindberg, American diving instructor Mackenzie Thorne, South African couple Peter and Annika van der Westhuizen, and British technical diver Rowan Sinclair. Before entering the water that evening, Thabo had conducted a thorough briefing, emphasizing the importance of staying together and maintaining constant awareness of surroundings. He had specifically mentioned that while shark encounters were rare during night dives, the unusual water conditions might have altered normal behavioral patterns of the local marine life. Each diver carried a primary underwater torch and a backup light, with additional chemical light sticks attached to their tanks for visibility. The group entered the water at around 8:30 p.m., descending to a depth of approximately 65 feet where the upper structures of the shipwreck could be explored. For 40 minutes, the dive progressed smoothly as they navigated around the ghostly remains of the vessel. Claire lagged slightly behind the main group several times, pausing to photograph interesting coral formations that had established themselves on the wreckage. At around 9:14 p.m., according to the dive computers later recovered, the group had moved toward the stern section of the wreck. Claire had once again fallen slightly behind, focusing her camera on a school of nocturnal fish illuminated by her torch. The gap between her and the main group was no more than 15 feet, but in the dark ocean water it was enough to isolate her momentarily from the others. Without warning, a juvenile great white shark, later estimated to be about 11 feet long, emerged from the darkness beyond the reach of Claire's light. The shark, possibly confused by the artificial lights or drawn by the diver's movements, charged directly toward Claire. Marine biologists would later speculate that the shark might have mistaken the silhouette of her diving equipment against the surface light for that of a seal, its natural prey. The shark struck with tremendous force, biting into Claire's right leg just below the knee. The impact sent her spinning through the water, causing her to lose grip on both her camera and primary torch. The other divers, alerted by the sudden commotion and the beam of Claire's falling torch dancing erratically through the water, turned to witness the horrifying scene. Thabo immediately signaled for the group to cluster together, creating a larger, more intimidating presence in the water. Meanwhile, Claire, despite the shock and pain, had managed to maintain enough composure to remember her emergency training. Rather than panicking and thrashing, behaviors that might trigger a predatory response, she struck the shark's sensitive nose area with her diving knife that she had managed to unsheath from her ankle. The shark, perhaps startled by the unexpected retaliation, or confused by the sudden increase in activity as the other divers rushed toward the scene, released its grip and disappeared back into the darkness. The entire attack had lasted less than 10 seconds, but had caused severe damage to Claire's leg, tearing through her wetsuit and leaving deep lacerations across her calf and shin. Sven and Thabo quickly moved to Claire's side, with Sven applying pressure to the wound while Thabo signaled for an emergency ascent. The group's training proved invaluable as they executed a controlled but urgent return to the surface, carefully managing Claire's ascent rate to avoid decompression sickness despite the emergency. Upon reaching the surface, the team on the dive boat, alerted by the premature return of Bubbles, was already prepared for an emergency. They hauled Claire aboard first, immediately applying a tourniquet and administering first aid. The boat captain, Hendrik Botha, radioed for emergency medical services while speeding back to the harbor at maximum velocity. An ambulance was waiting at the dock when they arrived 23 minutes later. Claire was rushed to a nearby hospital where a surgical team specializing in trauma was standing by. The operation lasted over 5 hours as surgeons worked to repair severed blood vessels, damaged muscles, and torn ligaments. While recovering in the hospital, Claire learned that she had been extremely fortunate. The shark's bite had missed her main arteries by millimeters, and the quick response from her diving companions had prevented potentially fatal blood loss. Marine conservation experts who interviewed Claire explained that great white sharks rarely attack humans deliberately, and this encounter was likely a case of mistaken identity facilitated by the low visibility conditions. Claire's recovery took almost a year of intensive physical therapy, but she eventually regained 90% functionality in her injured leg. Rather than deterring her from diving, the experience channeled her professional focus toward shark conservation. 6 months after the attack, she launched a photography project titled Misunderstood Predators, aimed at educating the public about shark behavior and the importance of these apex predators in marine ecosystems. The incident led ocean explorers to implement additional safety protocols for night dives, including reducing group sizes, requiring additional safety divers, and restricting photography activities to designated areas where divers could remain in closer proximity to their guides. Claire's experience became a powerful teaching case in diving safety courses across South Africa, emphasizing the unpredictability of wild animal encounters and the value of proper emergency response training. It was November 2010, and False Bay near Cape Town, South Africa, was experiencing an unusually warm spell for the early summer season. The water temperature had risen to nearly 70 degrees Fahrenheit, drawing more beachgoers than typical for that time of year. False Bay had long been recognized as one of the world's prime great white shark habitats, with Seal Island at its center hosting a large colony of Cape fur seals that attracted the ocean's apex predators. Despite this known presence, shark attacks in the area remained statistically rare, with the local authorities maintaining shark spotters at popular beaches as a precautionary measure. On the morning of November 12th, 41-year-old Brian Thaxton Walker, an American expatriate who had relocated to South Africa 5 years earlier to pursue his passion for ocean sports, arrived at Muizenberg Beach on the western shore of False Bay. The beach was popular among surfers for its consistent waves and relatively shallow waters. Brian had become a respected figure in the local bodyboarding community, known for his skillful navigation of the breaks and his willingness to mentor newcomers to the sport. Brian worked as a digital marketing consultant, which allowed him the flexibility to schedule his workday around optimal wave conditions. That particular Friday morning, he had decided to take advantage of the reported excellent swells before heading to a client meeting in the afternoon. He had arrived at the beach shortly after 7 a.m., greeting several regular surfers he knew, including Thembisa Nkosi, a local surf instructor, and Australian tourist Lachlan McGregor, who had been surfing the spot all week while on vacation. The shark spotters stationed at their elevated position on the mountainside overlooking the beach had raised the green flag, indicating good visibility conditions and no sharks spotted. Brian checked this, as was his habit, before heading into the water. He had bodyboarded at this location hundreds of times and was well versed in the local safety protocols. After about 40 minutes in the water, Brian had paddled slightly farther from the main group of surfers, positioning himself to catch the larger sets breaking over a deeper section. According to Thembisa, who later recounted the events to authorities, there had been no warning signs or unusual activity in the water prior to the incident. The attack occurred just after 8:15 a.m., when Brian was approximately 100 yards from shore. Lachlan McGregor, who was paddling back out after riding a wave, reported seeing a massive dark shape moving rapidly beneath the surface toward Brian's position. Before he could shout a warning, a great white shark estimated to be 15 feet in length breached the surface directly beneath Brian's bodyboard. The force of the initial strike launched both Brian and his bodyboard into the air, before he fell back into the churning, suddenly blood-tinged water. The sound of the impact and Brian's brief cry alerted nearby surfers, who turned to witness the shark's massive tail thrashing at the surface as it disappeared with Brian beneath the waves. Thembisa immediately paddled toward shore, shouting for the beach's lifeguards to raise the alarm, while Lachlan and two other surfers, local residents Werner Botha and Peter Janssen, courageously paddled toward the attack site. By the time they reached the area, approximately 30 seconds after the initial strike, there was no sign of Brian. Only his damaged bodyboard remained, floating upside down with a 16-inch section missing from one side where the shark's teeth had sheared through the polyethylene core. The surrounding water was discolored with blood spreading in the current. Despite the obvious danger, the three men remained in the area for several minutes, scanning the surface for any sign of Brian while lifeguards launched a rescue boat from shore. The shark spotters, who had not detected the shark's approach due to its deep position and rapid movement, immediately raised the black flag, signaling a confirmed shark sighting, and sounded the evacuation alarm for other water users. The rescue team dispatched vessels and a helicopter within 15 minutes of the attack. The search operation expanded throughout the day, with police divers joining the effort by mid-afternoon. Despite an extensive search covering several square miles of the bay, Brian's body was never recovered, leading authorities to conclude that the great white had taken him into deeper waters. The forensic marine biologist who investigated the incident, Dr. Imani Okiki from the Cape Town Marine Institute, explained that the attack bore the hallmarks of a great white's investigative bite rather than predatory feeding behavior. In such cases, the shark, curious about an unfamiliar object in its environment, uses its mouth, the only appendage available for tactile investigation, to determine whether the object is suitable prey. Unfortunately, even a single investigative bite from a great white is often fatal, due to the tremendous force and resulting trauma. The attack sent shockwaves through the local surfing community, where Brian had been a familiar and well-liked figure. Memorial services were held at Muizenberg Beach 1 week after the incident, with over 200 surfers and bodyboarders paddling out beyond the breakers to form a circle in Brian's memory, a traditional surfer's tribute to a fallen comrade. In the aftermath of the tragedy, local authorities temporarily closed nearby beaches and increased shark spotting efforts. The incident prompted renewed discussions about shark safety measures, including the potential deployment of electromagnetic shark deterrent systems along popular beaches. Brian's younger sister, Melissa Walker, traveled from Boston to collect his belongings and work with local officials. Rather than advocating for culling or hunting the shark responsible, she established the Brian Walker Ocean Safety Foundation, which continued to fund research into non-lethal shark deterrent technologies and education programs for water sports enthusiasts. The great white responsible for the attack was never identified, though shark researchers noted an unusually large female had been tagged in the area 3 months earlier and might have returned to False Bay's waters. The shark spotting program, already considered among the world's most advanced, was further refined based on the lessons learned from this incident. with additional spotting positions established and improved communication systems implemented between spotters and emergency responders. Today, a small bronze plaque affixed to a rock at Muizenberg Beach commemorates Brian Walker's life and his love for the ocean, serving as both a tribute and a subtle reminder of nature's unpredictable power. Local bodyboarders have named a particular break Walker's Point in his memory, ensuring that his presence remains part of the seascape he cherished. The year was 2017. Off the coast of Baja California, Mexico, 25-year-old Alex Torres was deep into a spearfishing expedition. The waters off Baja were known for their rich marine biodiversity, attracting fishermen and divers from all over the world. Alex, an experienced freediver, had traveled here with 3 friends, eager to hunt for yellowfin tuna in the crystal-clear waters of the Pacific. The sun was high in the sky, casting shimmering patterns on the ocean surface as he prepared for another deep dive. Descending to about 30 feet, Alex moved with calculated ease, scanning the blue for his target. Holding his breath, he spotted a large tuna swimming just within range. With a well-aimed shot, he speared it cleanly. The fish thrashed violently before going still. As he secured his catch and began his ascent, he noticed a sudden shift in the water. A shadow, sleek and fast-moving, cut through the blue. A 10-foot short-fin mako shark had appeared, seemingly from nowhere. It was likely drawn in by the blood of the tuna, its instinct sharp and its hunger piqued. Makos were notorious for their speed and aggression, and this one wasted no time in making its move. Before Alex could react, the shark lunged, its rows of serrated teeth clamping down on his shoulder. A searing pain shot through his body as the force of the attack jerked him backward. The initial shock of the bite sent waves of panic through Alex's body. He had always been aware of the risks that came with spearfishing, but no amount of preparation could have fully equipped him for the raw, primal violence of a shark attack. The water around him turned murky with blood, the deep red contrasting starkly against the otherwise crystal-clear blue. He could feel the immense strength of the predator as it momentarily held him in its grip. Its powerful jaw locked onto his flesh. The moment stretched, every second dragging into what felt like an eternity. His mind raced, searching for a way out of the nightmare unfolding around him. The pain was unlike anything he had ever experienced before, a deep, burning sensation that radiated through his entire body, but he knew he could not allow himself to freeze. His survival depended on his ability to fight back. Panicked, but determined to survive, Alex gripped his spear with his free hand and drove it into the shark's side. The predator recoiled, releasing its grip just enough for him to break free. Blood, his and the tuna's, clouded the water, and he knew he had little time before the mako decided to strike again. His lungs burned as he fought to swim upward, the weight of his injury slowing him. As he struggled, his vision blurred, his body screaming for oxygen. Every muscle in his body was engaged in the desperate attempt to break through the surface. He felt the ominous presence of the shark still circling beneath him, its movements eerily smooth, its dark shape a reminder that his escape was far from guaranteed. The ocean, once a place of solace and adventure, had suddenly turned into an arena of survival where he was at a severe disadvantage. Above, his friends had seen the struggle. From the boat, they shouted his name, scrambling to help as he neared the surface. Just as he reached them, the shark reappeared, circling just below, its dark eyes locked onto him. His friend Diego leaned over, extending a hand, and with a last desperate push, Alex grasped it. They hauled him aboard, his body trembling from the exertion and blood loss. The deck of the boat became a makeshift battlefield, as his friends frantically worked to stop the bleeding. Someone wrapped a towel tightly around his shoulder, applying as much pressure as possible to slow the flow of blood. Diego's hands were stained red as he worked, his face a mask of determination and fear. The reality of the attack had settled in, and the group knew that time was of the essence. They had to get him to medical attention before he lost too much blood. The boat's engine roared to life as they sped toward shore, each wave they hit sending jolts of pain through Alex's battered body. On deck, the full extent of his injury became clear. Deep puncture wounds lined his shoulder, the flesh torn where the shark's teeth had latched on. His wetsuit was shredded, stained crimson. Diego pressed a towel against the wound to slow the bleeding, while another friend radioed for emergency assistance. Alex winced as the pain sharpened, his adrenaline beginning to fade. Every throb of pain served as a reminder of how close he had come to death. His breathing was shallow, his mind foggy from the blood loss. Despite the chaos around him, a part of him was in disbelief that he was still alive. His friends kept talking to him, urging him to stay awake, to focus on their voices and not slip into unconsciousness. The boat ride felt endless, the shoreline too far away, the horizon stretching impossibly distant. Despite the severity of the attack, he remained conscious as they sped back to shore. By the time they reached land, paramedics were waiting. They rushed him to a nearby hospital, where he underwent emergency treatment. The doctors marveled at his survival. Had the bite been just inches lower, it could have severed an artery, ending his life within minutes. The sterile smell of the hospital, the blinding white lights, and the beeping of monitors were a stark contrast to the wild unpredictability of the ocean he had just left behind. Lying in a hospital bed, the events played over and over in his mind. He had survived, but he knew he would never look at the sea the same way again. The attack had taken something from him, his sense of invincibility, his confidence in the water, but it had also given him something in return, a newfound respect for the creatures that ruled the ocean, and a reminder of just how fragile human life truly was. After weeks of recovery, Alex was left with a jagged scar across his shoulder, a permanent reminder of his encounter. Though shaken, he refused to let fear keep him from the ocean. He continued spearfishing, but with a newfound respect for the creatures that lurked in its depths. The attack had been a harsh lesson, one that reaffirmed the ocean's unpredictability and the delicate balance between man and nature. The sea was not his enemy, nor was the shark that had nearly ended his life. It was simply following its instincts, as he had followed his. Though the fear never fully disappeared, he learned to embrace it, using it as a tool rather than a hindrance. He would always carry the memory of that day with him, etched into his body and his mind, a testament to the razor-thin line between survival and tragedy. The late afternoon of March 2014, the coastal waters off Waipa, a remote town in Queensland, Australia, shimmered under the golden light of the setting sun. Known for its thriving fishing industry and stunning beaches, Waipa attracted locals and tourists alike for various water sports. The region, however, was also home to bull sharks, an aggressive species that thrived in both salt and fresh water. Despite sporadic warnings about shark activity, residents continued to enjoy the ocean, believing attacks were rare. Adrian Cole, a 36-year-old experienced kneeboarder and lifelong water enthusiast, had spent much of his life navigating these waters. That afternoon, he and his 3 friends had taken their boat out to a popular but relatively isolated stretch of coastline known as Albatross Bay. The conditions were perfect: calm water, a gentle breeze, and barely any other boats in sight. Adrian had strapped himself onto his kneeboard, being towed by their small vessel, cutting through the waves effortlessly. As he focused on his movements, he remained unaware of the dark shape lurking beneath him. A bull shark, estimated to be around 10 feet long, had been prowling nearby. These predators were notorious for their unpredictable nature and were known to attack with sudden ferocity. Whether it was the movement of the board or an instinctual reaction, the shark decided to strike. Without warning, the water erupted. The shark lunged from below, clamping its powerful jaws around Adrian's leg. His body jerked violently as the force of the attack nearly yanked him off the kneeboard. He let out a scream, but the rush of wind and water muffled it. His friends, watching from the boat, initially thought he had lost balance, but within seconds they realized the horror unfolding. Adrian struggled, instinctively trying to kick free, but the shark held firm, dragging him beneath the surface. The blood clouded the water instantly. His friends, in a frantic panic, turned the boat toward him, shouting his name. One of them, Owen Mercer, grabbed a rope, ready to throw it as soon as Adrian surfaced. But when Adrian reappeared, the sight was horrifying. His leg was mangled and he was barely conscious, his face twisted in agony. As the shark circled back, likely triggered by the scent of blood, Owen and another friend, Marcus Tate, pulled Adrian toward the boat with desperate urgency. The shark's dorsal fin cut through the water again, but before it could strike a second time, they managed to haul him onto the deck. The deck was instantly slick with blood and Adrian's breathing was ragged. One of the friends applied pressure to his wound while another frantically radioed for emergency services. They were several minutes from shore and time was slipping away. Adrian's face had turned pale, his body shaking from massive blood loss. They did everything they could, pressing towels to the wound, keeping him conscious. But by the time they reached land, paramedics confirmed the worst. Adrian had succumbed to his injuries before they could get him to the hospital. The news spread through the small town rapidly, sending shockwaves through the community. Authorities issued warnings, urging locals to be cautious in the waters, but there was little comfort in their words. The attack was a chilling reminder of how quickly nature could turn. Adrian had been an experienced waterman, but even his skill and knowledge hadn't been enough. In the following weeks, debates erupted about increased shark activity in the region. Some suggested culling efforts, while others insisted on heightened safety measures. But for those who had been on the boat that day, no policy change or warning would erase the memory of watching their friend fight for his life against a force of nature beyond their control. Adrian's family, devastated by his sudden loss, held a memorial service in his honor. His parents, longtime residents of Queensland, spoke of their son's deep love for the ocean, his adventurous spirit, and his unwavering kindness. His younger sister, Emily Cole, struggled to come to terms with the tragedy, questioning how someone so experienced in the water could fall victim to such an attack. She recalled how Adrian had spent his childhood playing in these very waters, never fearing what lay beneath the surface. His absence left an unfilled void in the lives of those who knew him best. The attack led to increased scrutiny of shark behavior in the area. Marine biologists and experts weighed in, discussing the possible reasons for the attack. Some suggested that increased fishing activities in the region had disrupted the sharks' natural hunting patterns, making them more aggressive. Others pointed out that bull sharks, known for their territorial nature, often roamed close to shore, especially during warmer months. There were even debates about whether the rising temperatures due to climate change were affecting shark migration patterns, bringing them into closer contact with humans. Adrian's friends, still grappling with the trauma, recounted every moment of the attack to authorities and journalists. Owen Mercer, who had been closest to the incident, described the helplessness he felt as he watched his friend get dragged under. He had nightmares about the sight of Adrian's blood in the water, the desperate thrashing and the chilling silence that followed once they pulled him onto the boat. Even Marcus Tate, who had managed to help lift Adrian aboard, admitted that he had struggled with overwhelming guilt, wondering if they could have done something differently to save him. In the months that followed, local authorities installed additional safety measures, including increased patrols and monitoring of shark activity. Signs warning about bull shark presence were placed at various beaches, and some residents even took it upon themselves to create local awareness campaigns. However, there was no stopping the ocean from being what it was, a vast, unpredictable domain ruled by creatures that had inhabited it long before humans ever set foot in the water. Years later, Adrian's story remained a cautionary tale among water sports enthusiasts in Queensland. Newcomers to the region often heard about the tragedy from locals, a grim reminder of the ocean's dangers. Yet despite the risks, people continued to enter the water, some taking greater precautions, others believing it would never happen to them. But those who had been there that day, who had seen the raw power of nature firsthand, knew otherwise. The ocean gave much, but it could also take without warning. In the summer of 2013, the Pacific waters off Pine Island, Costa Rica, were teeming with marine life. The island, a remote and uninhabited destination located over 300 miles from the mainland, was a world-renowned diving destination. Its waters were home to vast schools of hammerhead sharks, an attraction for underwater photographers and researchers. The area's rich biodiversity has made it a hotspot for shark tourism, drawing divers hoping to capture the haunting beauty of these majestic creatures. Among them was Daniel Fraser, a 35-year-old wildlife photographer known for his daring expeditions. Having spent over a decade capturing underwater images in some of the world's most treacherous environments, he was no stranger to the unpredictability of nature. He had joined a small group of photographers on a week-long diving trip, hoping to document the famed scalloped hammerhead sharks that migrated through the area. On the fourth day of the expedition, Daniel and his dive partner, Luis Navarro, descended into the deep blue at a popular dive site known as Bajo Arit. It was a submerged seamount where hammerheads congregated in large numbers. As they hovered near the ocean floor, Daniel marveled at the swirling mass of sharks above him. They moved in coordinated formations, their silhouettes casting shadows against the filtered sunlight from the surface. It was exactly the kind of moment he had traveled thousands of miles to capture. He positioned his camera and began snapping photos, adjusting his settings to account for the shifting light. The sharks remained indifferent to his presence, their characteristic hammer-shaped heads swinging side to side as they searched for prey. However, as he moved closer to get a detailed shot, an unexpected disturbance altered the mood of the dive. A sudden shift in current caused Daniel to drift slightly off position, bringing him nearer to the school. His camera strobes flashed as he attempted to regain control. In that moment, one of the hammerheads broke away from the group, turning sharply toward him. The shark's movements were erratic, and it was clear something had unsettled it. Before Daniel could react, the shark lunged, its streamlined body propelling it forward with startling speed. Its serrated teeth clamped down on his calf in a sudden burst of force before immediately releasing. The pain was immediate, a searing sensation that radiated through his leg. Daniel instinctively recoiled, his regulator expelling a cloud of bubbles as he let out a muffled groan. Luis, who had been a few feet away, saw the attack unfold. He rushed to Daniel's side, signaling for an emergency ascent. Blood trailed in the water, a dangerous lure for other predators in the vicinity. They had to get to the surface, fast. Daniel pressed his hand against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding as they ascended. Every movement sent jolts of pain through his leg, but he focused on keeping his breathing steady. The ascent felt agonizingly slow. Finally, they broke through the surface, where the dive boat had already begun moving toward them. The crew wasted no time pulling Daniel aboard. One of the dive guides immediately applied a tourniquet while another radioed for medical assistance. Though the wound was deep, the bite had not severed any major arteries. Still, the risk of infection was high, and they needed to get him back to the mainland as soon as possible. The return journey was tense, with Daniel lying on the deck, his leg wrapped in makeshift bandages. The pain was persistent, but his mind remained sharp. Despite the trauma, he clutched his camera, reviewing the shots he had taken. Miraculously, he had captured the precise moment of the attack. The hammerhead's gaping mouth, its eyes fixated on him just before the bite. Once back in Costa Rica, Daniel was rushed to a medical facility where doctors treated his injuries. The wound required extensive stitches, and he was advised to avoid diving for several months while he healed. The experience had shaken him, but he never lost his respect for the ocean. In interviews following the attack, he recounted the moment with a sense of humility, emphasizing that the shark had likely reacted out of fear or confusion rather than aggression. His photo of the attack became a striking piece in his collection, a stark reminder of the unpredictable nature of wildlife encounters. It was later published in a feature about the delicate balance between humans and marine predators. While the incident left him with a lasting scar, it also solidified his belief that understanding and respecting the natural world was more important than fearing it. Despite the close call, Daniel continued his work in underwater photography. He became an advocate for shark conservation, using his platform to educate others about the importance of preserving marine ecosystems. Though he never forgot the pain of that bite, he refused to let it define his relationship with the ocean. Instead, he used it as a lesson, a reminder that every dive carried risks, but also the possibility of capturing something truly extraordinary. Natalia Mirova had worked hard to reach this moment. At 28, she was one of Russia's rising film stars, known for her fierce determination and love for daring roles. When she signed on to play an adventurous oceanographer in Beyond the Abyss, she insisted on doing all her own underwater stunts. The production had moved to the South African coast, where the water ran deep and the marine life was real. The plan was ambitious: to capture a tense diving scene in open water, using real bait to attract small fish around the fake coral reef constructed beneath the surface. The crew had been preparing for weeks. Shark specialists were on site, divers were in place, and every possible safety measure had been taken, or so they thought. On May 5, 2025, the sea looked calm. Clear skies stretched across the horizon and the wind was gentle. Natalia suited up in a sleek black wetsuit, her dark hair pulled tight under her diving hood. She climbed onto the boat's edge, gave the camera crew a thumbs up, and slipped quietly into the water. Below her, the underwater set looked surreal, an artificial coral reef constructed of plastic and painted foam, meant to evoke mystery and ancient secrets. Around it, schools of fish shimmered in the light. A light trail of chum had been released just minutes before to attract more fish, creating a cinematic effect of life and movement in the water. But it attracted more than just small fish. What no one anticipated was the presence of an 18-foot great white shark cruising the deeper waters nearby. Drawn by the scent and the sudden increase in activity, it moved in fast and without hesitation. Natalia was moving toward a rock formation on the artificial reef when the water behind her shifted. In a flash, the shark surged upward from the blue void. The animal's massive head broke through the shimmering bait cloud, jaws wide and eyes black as death. It clamped down on Natalia's thigh with bone-crushing force. She never saw it coming. The water exploded in a burst of bubbles and blood as Natalia was dragged downward. The initial strike broke through muscle and tissue, tearing through her leg. She thrashed instinctively, panic setting in as she was yanked away from the set. Her regulator stayed in her mouth, but her body screamed in agony as she struggled against the predator. Above, chaos erupted. Safety divers saw the attack through the murky water and rushed toward her. One of them, a former Marine named Jacobs, kicked hard with his fins, spear in hand. He lunged at the shark, jabbing the weapon into its gill area. The shark flinched, twisting away with a slow, wide turn, still gripping Natalia as it moved. Another diver struck the side of the shark's snout with a metal rod, the shock finally making the beast loosen its grip. Natalia floated upward as the shark released her. Blood clouded the water around her like smoke. Two divers grabbed her arms and legs and propelled her upward with all the strength they had. She was barely conscious, her eyes glassy from pain and shock. Her thigh was mangled, sinew and bone exposed, and her wetsuit shredded. By the time they reached the surface, the water trailing behind her had turned deep red. The crew pulled her onto the dive platform with trembling hands. One of the paramedics immediately applied a tourniquet to her leg as the helicopter was called in. Natalia's breathing was shallow, but she was alive. Her lips trembled from the cold and the trauma, and her hands gripped the medic's arm with fading strength. It took less than 15 minutes for the helicopter to arrive, but every second felt eternal. The flight to the hospital was a blur. She went in and out of consciousness, flashing between the moment of impact and the unbearable pressure of the shark's jaws. The emergency team worked fast. Surgeons spent hours repairing the damage. Torn arteries, shredded muscle, and cracked bone. They saved her leg, but barely. Back on the set, the production halted immediately. Divers scoured the water for any sign of the shark, but it was long gone. Investigators confirmed it had been drawn in by the fish activity and the use of chum, something that would never be allowed again in such proximity to a live diver. The crew was shaken, especially the safety team who had trained for this but had never truly believed it could happen. In the hospital, Natalia faced a long recovery. The pain was constant, the scarring permanent, yet she didn't break. Despite the trauma, she showed a resilience few expected. 2 weeks later, she gave a quiet statement from her hospital bed. She wouldn't quit the film. She would return, even if only for the last scenes, scarred and changed, but unbroken. Her team prepared to shoot the remaining underwater scenes in a closed tank without real marine life. Natalia returned to the set 6 weeks later. Her movements were slower. The wetsuit now had to be adjusted to accommodate compression wraps and a noticeable brace on her leg. The final scenes were filmed with caution, but with powerful emotion. She was no longer just acting. Her fear and determination on screen were real. Every breath she took underwater felt like a challenge to the memory of what had happened. The movie wrapped quietly. No media circus followed, as the production crew chose to keep the footage of the attack private. What remained was the story of a woman who had faced the most feared predator in the sea and survived. Natalia's return to the ocean was tentative. She would never dive the same way again. The sea had changed for her. It was no longer a place of beauty alone, it had shown her its teeth. But she endured. The scar on her leg, the limp in her step, and the haunted look in her eyes became part of her story. Not just as an actress, but as a survivor. The moon hung low over the Indian Ocean, casting silver streaks across the surface of the calm sea. Off the coast of Mozambique, 3 divers prepared to descend into the depths. Emma Pearson, a 35-year-old marine biologist and seasoned diver, checked her gear methodically. She had over a decade of experience in deep-sea dives, and she carried herself with quiet confidence. Her partner Tom, 38, was less experienced but reliable, drawn into diving through Emma's passion. His younger brother Ryan, just 24, was athletic and adventurous, but this would be only his 3rd night dive. He had begged to join, eager to prove himself. Their target lay 80 feet below, a wrecked freighter partially buried in sand, known among locals for its eerie silhouette and pockets of curious sea life. The trio entered the water from their anchored boat, each carrying a powerful torch. The world turned black as they submerged, their lights slicing through the inky darkness. For the first 10 minutes, everything went smoothly. The descent was quiet except for the rhythmic hiss of their regulators. Bioluminescent plankton flickered like stars in the deep. As they approached the wreck, Emma signaled for them to slow. She always liked to scan the environment before drawing closer. The twisted metal hull loomed ahead, barnacle-covered and ghostly. Fish darted in and out of broken windows. Everything seemed calm, but something felt wrong. Emma noticed the fish scattering. A school of jacks, once cruising lazily through the wreckage, vanished in an instant. She hovered in place, light sweeping back and forth. Her gut tightened. The water had grown colder. The silence deepened. She motioned for the others to stay close. That was when the darkness shifted. From the shadows beneath the wreck, a large bull shark surged forward with terrifying speed. It struck Emma first, jaws clamping down on her leg just above the ankle. She barely had time to register the shape before pain erupted through her body. The shark yanked hard, dragging her downward and slamming her against the wreck's metal hull. She kicked and thrashed as blood exploded from the wound, clouding her vision. Her torch dropped into the silt, its beam flickering uselessly. Tom lunged after her, reaching for her arm, trying to pull her free as she struggled. The shark turned sharply, releasing Emma as it sensed the flurry of movement. It vanished into the dark again. Emma felt her body going numb. Her fin was gone, her leg limp, and her mind clouded by shock. Tom grabbed her tightly and began swimming upward, trying to get her out of danger. Ryan hovered nearby, panicked, uncertain whether to flee or fight. His torch darted wildly through the water as he tried to track the shark. But the bull shark wasn't done. It returned with brutal force, this time targeting Ryan. From behind him, it accelerated, jaws wide, and slammed into his side. Its teeth ripped through the wetsuit, puncturing flesh and bone. Ryan twisted violently in the water, blood surging from his torso. He dropped his torch, which tumbled slowly downward like a dying star. Emma, still clutching Tom's arm, watched in horror as the water turned red around Ryan. Tom let go of her and kicked toward his brother, fists pounding the water, trying to scare the shark off. But the animal circled, fast and relentless. Ryan struggled, hands reaching out as the shark struck again, biting into his shoulder and dragging him downward into the black. Tom gave chase, but he was no match for the predator. Emma, weak and bleeding, floated near the surface. Her mask fogged, vision spinning. She could hear the distant rhythm of her own heartbeat, louder than the ocean itself. Ryan was gone. The shark had vanished with him into the wreck's shadows. Tom resurfaced seconds later, gasping, eyes wide with disbelief. He reached Emma, pulling her up by her harness. The two of them kicked desperately, rising together as fast as they could. Emma's blood left a trail behind them, a streak through the water that felt like a beacon for death. They broke the surface with a splash, sucking in the night air. Emma was barely conscious. Tom screamed for help toward the boat, where the support crew had already spotted their lights and were rushing to the edge. Hands pulled them from the water. A medic pressed bandages to Emma's leg, trying to slow the bleeding. Tom dropped to the deck, shivering, face pale, muttering Ryan's name under his breath. The younger brother hadn't surfaced. No one expected him to. The boat sped toward shore as radio calls went out. Search crews returned at dawn with divers and equipment, but the wreck was empty. They found pieces of torn neoprene and a bloodied flashlight half buried in sand. No body, no sign of the shark. Emma underwent surgery later that day to repair the damage. Her lower leg had been partially crushed, the tendons severed. She would walk again, but her diving days were over. Tom stayed by her side, silent and broken, haunted by the image of Ryan being dragged down, arms outstretched in the dark. Authorities listed the attack as a fatal shark encounter. Locals whispered about the wreck being cursed, about night dives that ended in silence. For Emma and Tom, it was no ghost story. It was the cruel, real violence of nature. A moment of stillness was shattered by power and instinct. The sea gave no warnings, no roar, no howl. Just the quiet rush of water and a flash of motion, followed by agony and silence. The ocean didn't grieve, but the survivors did. Emma never returned to diving. Tom moved inland, away from the coast. The boat was sold. The wreck site was marked off limits. Ryan's name was etched into a stone along the harbor wall, the inscription facing the sea. Every night after, Emma dreamed of bubbles and darkness, and the feeling of something just below.